The summer sun had settled into that warm, golden glow that made the entire neighborhood of Meadowbrook Ridge look deceptively calm. The houses sat in neat rows, the lawns trimmed to a suspiciously identical height, exactly how the HOA preferred it. But beneath all that curated symmetry pulsed the constant tension of a community ruled by an HOA president who believed every minor rule was the foundation of civilization itself. Her name was Karen Hollister, and in Meadowbrook Ridge, that name was spoken the same way people in disaster movies point to storm clouds on the horizon. In the center of this tidy battlefield lived Marcus, the kind of neighbor who waved at everyone, helped fix broken mailboxes, and minded his own business unless someone truly needed a hand. He was, by all accounts, the last person to stir trouble. And yet, it was always the peaceful ones who accidentally triggered the greatest storms. Marcus had planned a modest backyard cookout, nothing extravagant, no booming music, no massive crowds. The guest list consisted mostly of coworkers, a few neighbors he was friendly with, and one particularly important friend he hadn't seen in months. A city council member named Jordan, who happened to be visiting the area for unrelated meetings. It was an informal get-together, a chance to unwind, grill a few burgers, and enjoy the company of people who didn't obsess over hedge symmetry. The invitation had been simple and casual. There was no intent to flaunt any rules or challenge authority. Marcus had read the HOA book more times than he cared to admit, making sure nothing about a basic backyard barbecue violated anything. And conveniently for him, nothing did. The restrictions covered amplified sound, commercial events, street-blocking crowds, structural add-ons, and anything involving livestock, none of which applied. A small social gathering was permitted without needing formal approval. But that reality never stopped Karen. Rules, to her, weren't about what was written. They were about what she believed should be written. And what she believed was that any gathering larger than 3 people was essentially a riot waiting to happen. The trouble began before the first burger even hit the grill. Karen watched from across the cul-de-sac, standing behind her curtain with the vigilance of a hawk guarding a nest it didn't actually own. Every time someone parked near Marcus's house, she scribbled in a small notebook. Every time a guest carried a dessert dish into the backyard, her eyes narrowed. The sound of cheerful greetings drifting over the fence seemed to agitate her, like happiness was an HOA violation she had personal jurisdiction over. Marcus, in his usual optimistic nature, assumed she would find something else to occupy her evening. The garden club, perhaps, or policing the grass height of lots she didn't live next to. But Karen's need for control thrived most when she felt someone else's joy threatened as the grill warmed and the smell of seasoned meat drifted through the yard. The mood began to settle into something comfortably festive. Jordan, the council member, arrived quietly, blending into the gathering without any of the formality most people expected from politicians. They were known for their firm stance on unnecessary HOA power, something Karen, unknowingly, was about to crash headfirst into. The early part of the evening progressed just as Marcus hoped. Conversations flowed easily. Children played quietly near the patio. Guests complimented the setup, the cleanliness, the lack of noise. It was exactly the sort of harmless, neighborly event Meadowbrook Ridge should have encouraged. But the peace didn't last long. Karen emerged onto the street like a storm cloud manifesting into human form. Her walk was purposeful, stiff, loaded with the confidence of someone who believed the entire neighborhood had been placed under her personal care. In her hand she carried a clipboard, her weapon of choice, stacked with papers she had printed herself, none of which held any legal weight but all of which she insisted were essential. She made her way toward Marcus's house, pausing occasionally to document the location of every parked car. Even those legally parked offended her sensibilities. She scanned the backyard from the gate, observing adults calmly socializing and children playing, and somehow concluded catastrophe was imminent. Marcus noticed her approach only when the air shifted. Even without seeing her directly, the guests sensed something was off. Conversations quieted, and the collective atmosphere took on a subtle tension. No one spoke to her. She preferred initiating confrontation without invitation. But everyone felt her presence the way one feels the shadow of a bird overhead. Karen began pacing near the gate, glancing at the grill as if smoke itself were an act of rebellion. She inspected the patio, the decorations, the folding chairs carefully spaced for comfort. Each detail seemed to offend her more than the last. She muttered phrases under her breath, nodding as though agreeing with herself. She reviewed her papers repeatedly, turning pages with dramatic precision, preparing to unleash whatever fabricated regulation she had decided applied. Marcus tried to focus on tending the food, but he could feel Karen's scrutiny like a heat lamp on the back of his neck. He hoped she would retreat once she confirmed nothing was out of order. Instead, she stepped closer, standing with the posture of someone about to declare an emergency. There was a moment, a calm before impact, where the atmosphere around the yard felt suspended. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Jordan observed quietly, already sensing what was about to unfold. Marcus held onto the faint hope that Karen might change direction, turn around, and find some other crusade for the evening. But Karen thrived on disruption. She lived for the moment she could assert authority she didn't actually possess. She lifted her clipboard and prepared to intervene, convinced she had found the event that would grant her ultimate validation. Proof that she, the self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook Ridge, had once again saved the community from imagined chaos. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly predict, was that tonight, her attempt to control everything would put her face to face with the one person she should never have tried to challenge. The one person who could evaluate not just her actions, but the very power she wielded so recklessly. And that person was already in the backyard, watching her with steady, knowing eyes. The moment Karen opened her mouth to begin her crusade, the tone of the evening shifted permanently. And as the tension thickened in the humid summer air, the seeds of a confrontation far larger than a backyard barbecue were quietly taking root. Karen stood at the edge of the backyard, her posture stiff and triumphant, as if simply arriving at the scene granted her automatic authority. The tension she brought with her rippled across the gathering, sending subtle shifts through the posture of every guest. People who had been laughing now stood still. Those who had been eating suddenly found themselves hyper-aware of every bite. It was as though the mere presence of the HOA president drained the warmth from the barbecue like a cold wind passing through a bonfire. She began scanning the environment with exaggerated precision. Her head moved slowly from the grill to the seating area, then to the group of guests by the fence. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of food on folding tables and coolers lined neatly on the patio stones. Each item seemed to represent a personal affront, a statement that joy and community could exist without her involvement. The backyard itself was entirely compliant with the HOA's guidelines. Marcus had prepared the space with the same careful attention he applied to everything else. The grass was trimmed, the chairs neatly arranged, the grill placed well within safety guidelines. And yet, to Karen, the problem wasn't anything concrete or measurable. The problem was that Marcus had dared to gather people without asking her first. In her mind, approval wasn't just procedural, it was symbolic. She equated her personal permission with order, and anything outside of that was chaos. She positioned herself in the center of the yard's entrance, blocking the path with the subtlety of a boulder in a narrow stream. Guests watched her movements with the weary expectation of people who had seen this pattern before. Karen took in the scene once more, her grip tightening on her clipboard when she noticed the headcount had grown since her last surveillance session from behind her curtains. She poised herself to interrupt the gathering. The smell of grilling food drifted by, as if mocking her seriousness. Her nose wrinkled with distaste, not at the scent, but at the undeniable evidence of camaraderie occurring beyond her control. She began writing in her notebook, her pen scratching aggressively against the paper. Each stroke carried the weight of imagined infractions: excessive foot traffic, unregulated outdoor dining, unauthorized group assembly. None of those terms existed within the actual HOA guidelines, but that had never stopped her from inventing rules before. Guests exchanged silent looks, communicating without words their mutual understanding of what was about to unfold. A shift in the atmosphere made it clear the event was about to go from relaxed to complicated. Some quietly stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, like spectators moving back to give space to a looming confrontation. Karen lifted her chin slightly, preparing to assert dominance over the scenario. She moved her gaze toward Marcus, who had paused his work at the grill, becoming acutely aware of the unwanted attention. He tried to maintain his composure, aware that reacting with irritation would only fuel her. Meanwhile, Jordan observed all of this with the calm focus of someone accustomed to monitoring conflicts escalate before stepping in at precisely the right moment. Their gaze remained steady, analyzing Karen's behavior with increasing interest. Jordan was known for their stance against excessive HOA power, a philosophy formed from years of witnessing how small governing bodies could inflate their importance and infringe on people's everyday lives. Karen continued monitoring the party as if evaluating a crime scene. Her eyes lingered on the coolers, perhaps imagining they contained contraband rather than soft drinks and ice. She examined the modest decorations, a string of lights and a few tablecloths, apparently searching for a cause to declare them unapproved decorative installations. Her fixation then turned toward the guests themselves, counting heads once, twice, then again. Each recount emphasized her growing outrage, as if the crowd had doubled simply to spite her. To her, numbers equaled threat, regardless of the gathering's peaceful nature. The longer Karen stood there, the more emboldened she felt. Her chest rose slightly, her shoulders squared, and her breathing grew sharp and rehearsed, like someone preparing to deliver a speech they had been practicing in their head for hours. Karen repositioned her clipboard beneath her arm, gripping it tightly like a badge of office. She scanned the crowd one final time, her gaze sharp and dripping with judgment. And then, with a dramatic lift of her chin, she made a pronounced gesture toward the center of the yard. She behaved as though summoning order to reclaim what she perceived as slipping control of the neighborhood. Guests stiffened in anticipation, sensing the shift from observation to confrontation. The energy in the air thickened, heavy with expectation. For a moment, time seemed to suspend. Even the sizzle of the grill softened under the weight of the impending clash. But before Karen could take her next self-declared authoritative step forward, she became aware of someone watching her with a steadiness she had not anticipated. Jordan stepped into her peripheral vision, not close enough to confront, but close enough to ensure she noticed. Their posture was relaxed, their presence unobtrusive, yet their calm focus unsettled her. She glanced in their direction, uncertain of who they were, and the uncertainty brewed irritation. Karen had encountered guests before during her patrols, but rarely had one observed her without intimidation or irritation. Jordan's quiet, level gaze was neither. It was analytical, the gaze of someone used to evaluating policy, authority, and misuse of power. A flicker of discomfort passed across Karen's features, but she quickly stamped it down. She turned her attention away abruptly, attempting to re-establish her internal sense of superiority. Still, the moment lingered in the air. The presence of someone she did not recognize, and who seemed distinctly unimpressed by her tactics, planted a seed of unease. Karen scanned her notes once more, recalibrating her plan. She was determined not to allow this unknown variable to undermine her mission. She believed that this gathering needed correction, that the community relied on her vigilance. And now, with her self-perceived authority challenged by a stranger's mere calmness, she felt an even stronger urge to assert dominance. As Marcus watched her movements from the edge of the patio, he sensed the confrontation had only just begun. He felt it in the tightening clench of Karen's clipboard, in the sharp tilt of her posture, in the way she inhaled as though preparing to make a proclamation. The stage was set. The tension was primed. And the moment Karen decided to act would change the entire course of the night, especially when she discovered the identity of the quiet, attentive guest she had just dismissed without a second thought. The final moment before the breaking point felt strangely silent, as though the entire backyard inhaled at once. Even the rhythmic sizzling of the grill softened beneath the hum of tension. Karen stood centered at the gate, gripping her clipboard like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Every guest froze in place, watching her as though they were witnessing the first roll of thunder before a storm. She stepped forward, crossing into Marcus's backyard with the certainty of someone convinced the space belonged to her by right. The firmness of her posture radiated an almost ceremonial sense of control, as if she believed her entrance marked the official start to whatever disciplinary action she intended to impose. She scanned the faces around her, looking for some sign of shame, guilt, or acknowledgement of her self-declared authority. But the guests were quiet, not remorseful, just tired. They had seen enough HOA theatrics in Meadowbrook Ridge to recognize a familiar pattern. Karen would escalate, insist, invent, accuse, and Marcus, trying to remain patient, would attempt to explain or de-escalate. Normally, that was the rhythm. But tonight, the script was about to change and Karen had no idea. She turned her focus toward the grill, then toward the tables neatly arranged with food. She looked at the chairs, which were spaced comfortably but not excessively. Each detail seemed to intensify her irritation. In her mind, the gathering represented disrespect, a challenge to her self-appointed stewardship of the neighborhood. Her thoughts churned with the certainty that her intervention was not only justified, but necessary. The crowd felt her eagerness almost as a palpable force. Her shoulders lifted slightly, her chin tilted upward, and her breath grew deeper, more deliberate. She was preparing to do what she believed was her duty: declare the barbecue a violation and demand it be shut down. But before she could take another step, she noticed Jordan. They did not shift or retreat. They simply remained where they were, calm, observant, and unimpressed by her theatrics. Something about their composure unsettled her. It wasn't defiance, nor was it fear. It was a quiet authority that eclipsed her own, not through force, but through confidence. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly. She could not place who this person was, but their presence irritated her. She had grown accustomed to neighbors shrinking back, avoiding conflict, or quietly conceding to her demands. This person offered none of that. Their steady expression acted as a mirror, reflecting her own intensity back at her in a way she found deeply uncomfortable. Despite the unease, Karen continued forward, unwilling to let any stranger undermine her sense of supremacy. She flipped her clipboard to a page she had prepared, an assortment of typed bullet points posing as official regulations, even though none of them belonged to the actual HOA handbook. She scanned the list, reaffirming her chosen grievances, feeling the fire of imagined righteousness stoke higher within her. She felt validated by the silence of the crowd. To her, it was compliance. She interpreted their quiet as fear and their stillness as submission. She did not realize they were simply waiting for the inevitable moment the truth would dismantle her confidence. Karen moved closer to the center of the yard, where she felt she could command full attention. She planted her feet, lifted her clipboard, and prepared to assert authority. Her breath moved in sharply, powering her posture with certainty. But then Jordan stepped forward, not aggressively, not confrontationally, just enough to subtly reclaim the space Karen believed she owned. Their presence alone shifted the balance of power in the backyard. Karen's shoulders twitched, just barely, as though she had detected a disruption she couldn't explain. Across the yard, Marcus watched the shift with a mixture of apprehension and hope. He knew Jordan well enough to understand that silence was never accidental. When they remained quiet, it meant they were gathering context, choosing their moment with precision. He held his breath, sensing that the inevitable reckoning was near. As Karen steadied herself, she began mentally assembling a narrative in which she would end this gathering by sheer authority. She envisioned herself marching back down the cul-de-sac later, clipboard in hand, recounting how she had single-handedly preserved order. The neighborhood, in her fantasy, would look upon her with gratitude and validation. But that fantasy evaporated the moment Jordan stepped further into the center of the yard and stood directly opposite her. Karen paused mid-posture. For the first time that evening, uncertainty flashed openly across her expression. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back at Jordan, trying to determine whether this individual possessed any real authority or simply refused to be intimidated. That sliver of doubt cracked through her confidence. Jordan finally spoke, but only with their posture, their presence, their calm. It was enough. Recognition dawned gradually across the guests' faces as they realized what Karen had not yet discovered. The person she was trying to intimidate was someone with an authority far greater than the HOA's petty rulebook. Someone who had the power to investigate, regulate, and, if necessary, dismantle the overreach that had plagued Meadowbrook Ridge for years. Karen sensed the shift before she understood it. The air around her changed, no longer filled with quiet submission. The crowd's stillness took on a new meaning. Not fear, but anticipation. Jordan met her gaze directly, and in that simple act, Karen's entire foundation wavered. Her clipboard, once held with iron conviction, seemed suddenly less substantial. Her internal narrative struggled to adapt, scrambling to understand why the confidence she expected to see mirrored back at her was instead replaced by quiet scrutiny. Jordan then reached into a pocket and produced a small identification badge, holding it with effortless clarity. The emblem of the city council glinted in the evening light, unmistakable, undeniable, undeniable. And in that moment, Karen's world shifted completely. The authority she believed she controlled evaporated in an instant. The narrative she had constructed cracked apart. She had not just provoked a neighbor. She had attempted to enforce non-existent rules on a gathering attended by a city council member. A figure with a long-standing agenda against HOA abuse. A ripple moved through the guests, not loud, but charged with relief and shock and satisfaction. Some turned toward each other, exchanging incredulous glances. Others looked back at Karen with the dawning realization that retribution for years of pettiness might finally be at hand. Karen's face drained of color. Her posture faltered. The weight of her clipboard suddenly became a burden rather than a badge, and in front of the entire neighborhood, she realized she was no longer the hunter. She was the one being evaluated. The council member stepped forward with calm, measured authority, and Karen understood, far too late, that her crusade had finally collided with a force she could not control.